Salima, and welcome back or new. So, today's video is going to be a little bit different. You see, I've recently encountered a bunch of pagan transphobes, and it got me thinking, I should develop a trans theology. Now then, what do I mean by a trans theology? Well, trans theology is quite simply a theology that accounts for the various gendered interpretations of the divine. That is to say, what is of interest to this theology are the various gendered ways in which we interact with deity, as well as providing a theological explanation that provides a polytheistic justification for the existence of trans people like myself. So, before embarking on applying this to the divine, I must first answer one very difficult question. What is gender? Gender is a set of symbolisms that is connected to male or female body, as well as to a particular set of actions such as body performances. Notice here that I state a particular body. The reason is that we as humans assign gender to inanimate objects as well as to animate things. An easy example of this is that when we see a male-bodied child playing with masculine symbols, that is, figurines, the figurines become action figures. But when we see a girl playing with the same type of figurines, but with feminine symbolism, they become dolls. Thus, dolls become gendered as well as action figures. So, what is with my use of the term symbolism here? If I were to limit this theology to, say, Western culture, then I would simply have defined gender as the symbolism of masculinity and femininity that we connect to being male-bodied or female-bodied. The problem, of course, is that the terms masculine and feminine here denote a Western set of symbolism used to see gender. For example, the Navajo have a fifth gender, which is roughly equivalent to being gender fluid. In Hawaii, there is the Mahu gender, and in India, there is the Hijra. As can be clearly seen, the idea of there being only masculine and feminine genders within a given culture is clearly one that is biased towards a Western perspective, and therefore I use the general term symbolism to account for symbols which may, in a given culture, not be seen as either masculine or feminine. Even in Western culture, we have a phenomena of non-binary people, some of whom see themselves as in between masculine and feminine, and others who see themselves as outside the binary. So then, how does gender manifest in people? Well, given that gender represents a symbology that is attached to human bodies, it makes sense that we as humans would attach ourselves to various symbols and meanings. Hence, one's gender identity is the sense of oneself as male or female, that is, in the sense of oneself as particular sex. An example is that my gender identity, for the moment, is a woman. That is, I experience myself, my sense of self, as a female. I communicate this is my sense of self by doing things such as wearing a bra, a dress, makeup, etc. This is what is referred to as one's gender expression. That is, the way we communicate our gender through our dress, appearance, and behavior. Although gender identity might seem to be linked to sex, it isn't at all. I have the sense of being female, yet my body was labeled male at birth. This, of course, is what results in gender dysphoria, which is a discomfort with my relationship between my body's assigned sex and my gender identity. Note, however, that having dysphoria is not necessary, but rather a sufficient condition for being trans. Another way, and for our purpose the most important way, is that one can simply just reject the assertion that they are within the gender binary. So what does this mean in terms of interacting with the divine? From a polytheistic viewpoint, the gods in and of themselves would not have a gender as we conceptualize it. This is due to gender being a set of symbols ascribed onto bodies. The gods, being disembodied when they will it, thus lack a corporeal form in and of themselves, and therefore any inherent gender as we would conceptualize it. This does not mean, however, that the gods cannot have a gender, so to speak. In fact, their representation as gendered beings in sacred spaces would seem to indicate that the gods tend to interact with us via gendered ways. That is, in a form which is most relatable to us. And after all, as I've said before, gender is a set of symbols that we ascribe, so it would make sense for the divine to communicate with us via this set of symbols. In fact, some gods even seem to take an interest in enacting various human gender roles, such as Ninil, Inanna, Hathor, Thor, Njordr, etc. But it's also interesting to note that many of these gods can revert their gender. Famous examples include Njordr, who, although being a man in the Viking Age, was interpreted by the ancient Scandinavians in Germanic as the goddess Nertus. In the saga of the Volsung, we see a man named Skadi. Even though Skadi is supposed to be a goddess. Odin is infamous for bending Viking gender roles in what he does with Sather, which, by the way, is normally a woman's thing to do, up to the point that where any man who did it in Viking times could face pretty bad social consequences. In fact, one could go so far as to say that Odin is genderqueer. And this is all just in the north. If we move further to the Middle East, the picture becomes even more complicated. In Sumer, priests called Gala, who, let's say, were of an Inanna, would often perform lamentation songs in Emesa, which is a sociolect normally used by women, and in this case, used by priests in order to soothe the heart of the heavenly queen. In Egypt, one of the chief gods, Re, just straight up has a feminine aspect called Re Tawi, Re of the two lands. Thus, it should be clear that the gods are not inherently one gender or the other. In fact, we really can't say if there is some form of divine gender by which the gods interact with each other. All we can do is interpret their actions via our cultural symbols. And to try to argue that a particular god can only be interpreted via a set of masculine or feminine symbols is to say that that god is inherently limited by those cultural notions of gender, and therefore that the gods are limited to culture. To say that the gods are limited to culture is basically to say that they are archetypes, as there is nothing to distinguish them from the archetypes of Jung. At that point, because you are limiting a god to a specific set of cultural symbols, it thus ultimately leads to archetypical atheism. And while it is true that some gods may prefer to interact in some genders and not others, the overall point is that the gods interact in such a way as they wish. Unlike us humans who have to deal with the gender we develop, it appears that the gods are able to choose their genders at a whim, which means that we can add to the list of things gods can do that humans can't. So the next natural question is, how does this affect other spirits? Can a lake have a gender? What about a tree spirit or a mountain spirit? The answer may seem to be different, mainly due to these spirits being corporeal. I mean, after all, you aren't going to walk through a mountain spirit very easily without a lot of careful movement, and the mountain letting you. However, I do not believe it so, given that mountains can change their description and interactions based on various or towards various cultures. Thus, while a mountain may be seen as, say, masculine in one culture, for its supposed volatile nature, in another culture the mountain might be seen as a feminine protector, in another based on the interactions between the two particular cultures have with that mountain. The same logic can be applied to river and tree spirits. Some rivers are torrential, others possess qualities that can strengthen you. We see examples of this kind of thing across cultures. For example, Aegir is the god of the sea in the Norse pantheon, while Lady Nanche is the goddess of the sea in the Sumerian pantheon. So, what does this mean for us trans folks? The way gods and spirits interact with us shows that gender is a human construct through which we interact with the world. Hence, gender is very fluid, and what we construe and interact with as a particular gender is different from the way others do. Thus, it makes sense that sometimes one's gender identity isn't going to necessarily match the sex assigned at birth by a given culture, and at times it is necessary to change one's gender expression as one sees fit. This is a completely valid way to express oneself in religion, and any who say otherwise are denying the fluidity of the gods themselves, and to deny such fluidity is to deny the gods themselves.